What is going on in here?
The most memorable Super Nintendo games weren't necessarily the best ones. They were the ones that haunted you. The ones that made you question everything you thought you knew about game development. Games that existed in this bizarre twilight zone between nightmare and nostalgia, where someone clearly said, what if we just didn't make sense? Let's rewind into the 90s and revisit 10 SNES games that were so wonderfully unhinged, they're burned into our brains forever. Before we dive into this rabbit hole of retro weirdness, don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more content like this, so you can relax, unwind, and rewind to your heart's content. Starting at number 10 is Harley's Humongous Adventure, 1993. Let's say you're a dust mite. Not a mighty warrior, just a space marine. A microscopic parasite living in some kid's bedroom. That's the entire premise of Harley's Humongous Adventure. And somehow Electronic Arts thought this was $1 million idea. Developer Fake Software created what might be the only platformer where your enemies include vacuum cleaners that actually pose as existential threat. The game takes place across a house where everyday objects become towering monuments of terror. A dropped cookie becomes a boss fight. A glass of spilled milk turns into a swimming level. It's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, except nobody asked for it, and the physics make absolutely no sense. But what if I told you the game is genuinely well made? The sprite work is gorgeous. The level design is clever, and there's this unsettling attention to detail that makes you realize someone spent months perfecting the animation of a dust mite getting crushed by a rolling marble. It's existential horror disguised as a children's game, and frankly, it's more disturbing than most horror movies. Next at number 9 is Mr. Nutz from 1993. Now, Ocean Software looked at the mascot platformer craze and decided what the world really needed was an anthropomorphic squirrel with an attitude. Not just any squirrel, one with sunglasses, because nothing says extreme like a rodent in eyewear. Mr. Nutz had everything a 90s mascot needed. Collectible items, colorful worlds, and absolutely zero personality. But what made it weird wasn't the premise, it was the execution. The game featured some of the most bizarrely inconsistent physics ever programmed. One minute you're bouncing off enemies with perfect precision, the next you're falling through solid platforms because the collision detection apparently took a coffee break. Ocean spent serious money marketing this thing across Europe. They created TV commercials, magazine spreads, the full treatment. I mean, someone genuinely believed that kids would look like Mario and Sonic, then think, you know what, I need more generic woodland creatures in my life. The confidence was admirable. The results were not. Number 8 brings us Pieces, 1994. Leave it to the Japanese to create a puzzle game that's simultaneously about ancient Egypt, time travel, and existential dread. Pieces had to be the most unnecessarily complex block-dropping game ever conceived. The story involves collecting mystical artifacts scattered across different time periods, but the real mystery is why anyone thought this needed a story at all. You're dropping blocks, not saving the universe. Yet, here's this elaborate narrative about pharaohs and temporal paradoxes, delivered through cutscenes that feel like fever dreams. I think what made Pieces genuinely weird was its commitment to being difficult in the most unfair ways possible. Blocks fell at inconsistent speeds, the rotation controls had a mind of their own, and the scoring system seemed based on pure chaos theory. At number 7 is B.O.B. 1993. EA decided that what the world needed was a robot protagonist who looked like he was designed by a committee of people who had never seen a robot before. B.O.B. or Bob, which stood for Built for Obedience and Battle, was supposed to be this tough military android, but looked more like someone's first attempt at 3D modeling. The game itself was this bizarre hybrid of platforming and shooting that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Some levels played like Contra, others like Mega Man, and a few seemed to be having an identity crisis in real time. But the weirdest part was the voice acting. Bob had this inexplicably cheerful personality that completely contradicted his supposed military programming. He'd crack jokes while mowing down enemies, like a homicidal children's television host. Gray Matter, the development studio, created something that felt like 3 different games accidentally merged during production. At number 6 is Eek the Cat, 1993. Based on the Fox Kids animated series, this game should have been a straightforward licensed platformer. Instead, Ocean Software created something that felt like a fever dream about suburban anxiety. Eek wasn't just trying to save his neighborhood, he was trapped in this surreal nightmare where every house contained increasingly bizarre dangers. The game's structure made no logical sense. One level you're fighting mutant dogs in a backyard, the next you're navigating a kitchen where appliances have gained sentience and murderous intent. The show was weird, sure, but the game cranked that weirdness up to 11 and then broke off the knob. The attention to domestic detail was genuinely unsettling. These were unrecognizable suburban spaces transformed into death traps. It tapped into this primal fear of familiar places, becoming hostile like your own home turning against you. For a game based on a children's cartoon, it was surprisingly a psychological horror. Breaking into the top 5 is Plok, 1993. Software Creations created what might be the only platformer protagonist who literally tears himself apart to attack enemies. Plok was this fabric-based creature who could detach his limbs and launch them as projectiles, leaving behind a helpless torso that somehow still moved around. The premise alone was disturbing enough, but the execution made it genuinely bizarre. Plok's limbs would fly across the screen, autonomously attacking enemies before magically returning to his body. The whole thing felt like some kind of voodoo doll simulation, except designed for children. But wait, the game was actually innovative! The limb-throwing mechanics were genuinely creative. The level design was clever, and the soundtrack by Tim Follin was absolutely incredible. Someone took this nightmarish concept and crafted a legitimately good game around it. The fact that Plok never got a sequel feels like cosmic justice. Some ideas are too pure in their weirdness to be repeated. Number 4 brings Uniracers from 1994. DMA Design, fresh off creating Lemmings, decided their next project should be about unicycles, racing against each other. Not characters riding unicycles, just the unicycles themselves, possessed by some unknown force and competing in increasingly surreal environments. The visual design was intentionally minimalist, but that somehow made it more unsettling. These black silhouette unicycles performing impossible stunts against colorful backgrounds created this hypnotic, almost meditative experience. The strangest part was how genuinely good it felt to play. The physics were perfect, the trick system was intuitive, and the sense of speed was intoxicating. DMA Design had created this completely abstract concept and made it more compelling than most traditional racing games. Unfortunately, Pixar sued them over similarities to their unicycle character in Red's Dream, effectively killing any chance of a sequel. Because apparently, even in the world of anthropomorphic unicycles, lawyers will find a way to ruin everything. Into the top 3 is Gourmet Warriors from 1995. From the creators of Cho Anarchy comes something even more bizarre. A beat-em-up where collecting food ingredients was just as important as fighting enemies. This surreal brawler from the creators of Cho Anarchy took place in post-apocalyptic Zeus Heaven Magic City, where the primary concern wasn't radiation or mutants, but whether you could find enough protein to survive. The core mechanic was like this. Each enemy would drop a cooking ingredient when defeated, and at the end of each level, 2 ingredients would be combined to make a meal that would restore some health based on if the chosen character likes it or not. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. You could cook poison mushrooms that leave you at 0 health when the next level starts. Think about the implications here. The developers created a system where players could accidentally poison themselves through bad cooking choices. The game has no concept of how many lives the players can have. It is an automatic game over if the player dies. At number 2 is Super Bonk, 1994. Hudson Soft had a problem. Their mascot, Bonk, had been the face of the TurboGrafx 16, but that console was dying. So they brought him to the Super Nintendo and completely lost their minds in the process. Super Bonk allows Bonk to travel through time from his prehistoric levels to the inside of a dinosaur, a version of modern Chinatown, and the moon. The sentence alone should tell you everything about this game's relationship with logic. Bonk wasn't content being a simple caveman anymore. He had to become a time-traveling, dimension-hopping agent of chaos. Of course, the real weirdness was in the transformation system. Bonk gains unique abilities based on each combination, some of which consume the collectible candies and meat scattered throughout levels. The combinations were completely arbitrary. Eat the wrong candy, and suddenly you're a flower. Combine meat with the wrong ingredient, and you become a train. A train, with absolutely no explanation for how or why this biological impossibility occurs. The game's internal logic was that there was no internal logic. Hudson Soft created this fever dream where prehistoric cavemen could become locomotives through the power of processed sugar and expected people to just roll with it. Super Bonk wasn't just weird, it was aggressively weird, like it was daring you to question its choices. And honestly, we were all too confused to argue. But none of those games, and I mean none of them, prepared us for the absolute pinnacle of what were they thinking game development. Shaq Fu from 1994 wasn't just a bad, weird game. It was a cultural phenomenon wrapped in terrible programming. Released by Electronic Arts in 1994, this fighting game starred Shaquille O'Neal as, well, himself, but transported to an alternate dimension where basketball skills apparently translate to ancient martial arts mastery. What nobody talks about is that the game's story is absolutely unhinged. Shaq walks into a kung fu dojo in Tokyo, because why wouldn't he? And gets sucked through a portal to the second world, where he has to rescue a boy named Nezu from an evil mummy. I'm not making this up. But the thing that blew my mind when I replayed it recently is that the sprites are actually gorgeous. Delphine Software, the French studio behind it, had just finished working on Flashback and Out of This World. These guys knew how to make beautiful 2D animation. The problem was everything else. The controls felt like fighting underwater. The hit detection was so broken that you could watch your punch connect and somehow still miss. And don't get me started on the AI. It's either brain dead easy or impossibly cheap with zero middle ground. What made Shaq Fu fascinating wasn't that it was bad. Plenty of games were bad. It was that it was so bad in the most expensive way possible. EA threw serious money at this thing. They got the real Shaq, recorded actual voice lines, and even created custom artwork. This wasn't some quick cash grab, guys. It was a genuine attempt at creating something special that went spectacularly wrong. The 90s were this brief window where game developers had just enough technology to realize their wildest ideas, but not enough experience to know which ideas should probably stay unrealized. What weird games from your childhood still haunt your memories? Drop your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Some memories are worth rewinding and revisiting, even the ones that make us question reality itself.